Alright y'all, I'm actually here making this video again, man, for the second time actually, because I made a video like this when I first made this channel, and the update video that I already recorded, I wanted to redo because I just wasn't satisfied with the art. But from that picture, and obviously from the thumbnail and title, today we will be going over 4 of my favorite coloring styles and how I like to use them. Now this video, I'll just be displaying my process and explaining some of the tips and reference images that I usually look at when I'm trying to master these coloring styles. I will be making more in-depth tutorials about each of these styles at a later date. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with your line art or your sketch completed, it's time to add color. That's gonna take us into our first style, that old school. This first coloring style is very simple, man. It's inspired by those old classic animated movies like Pocahontas, Lilo and Stitch, Mulan, that whole old animated era. But that coloring style didn't really use too many shading. It was mainly flat colors and what seemed to be a type of tone. So that's exactly what I try to go for when I'm using this coloring style. So when I'm done applying flats, I'm 50% done. That next 50% will be applying tone, coloring my lines, and adding texture. Now you can add slight shading if you want to, because movies like Pocahontas, Lilo and Stitch, you can see a small shading on the nose, maybe under the neck, or of course if there's an actual lighting source on your character, then you would want to shade that properly. One thing about me when it comes to art, while there is a proper way to do certain things, it's really up to the artist, man. So have fun with it. If you think it's cool, then it's cool. And when it comes to the tone, I feel like this would play the biggest part, especially when you're in a certain environment with your character. In this case, I'm just drawing on a plain background, but in those movies that I listed earlier, depending on where that main character is, there will be a certain tone, you know, over that character that will either make them darker, lighter, or more of a certain shade color. If they say we're in a cave or like, you know, around fire, maybe they will be a little bit more red or orange. But once you found your tone, I would definitely suggest coloring your lines. Now you can leave them black, but with movies like Pocahontas and a lot of those old Pixar Disney animations, if you zoom in on the character's outline, you will notice that they're not completely black. They actually colored kind of to match that section of the character, whether it's the skin, clothing, hair. You will see that the lines are colored. I feel like this to me kind of keeps it 2D but almost adds that 3D aspect to it, and it really grew to become one of my favorite coloring styles. And last but not least, add some type of texture like a grain or a noise filter to give it that old look, but it also kind of adds a freshness to it, almost like that missing piece that you might not see with it looking, you know, very clean. But in the end, it should look something like this. Now the next 2 coloring styles on my list are honestly very similar in style, but it really just depends on how you want to go about it. One of those styles is the comic book style. Now if you're a fan of comic books, you know that there's many different artists out there and they color their art in so many different ways. But majority of comics always tend to have those deep black lines and black shading. So if the old school digital coloring had no shading, the comic book style would make use of the black lines for shading. I'll be putting up reference images in the back, but certain parts of your character like the outline or maybe folds in the clothes, if your character's wearing tights or some type of armor, a lot of that would be filled in with black. Hatching lines, little speed lines, some halftones, all that good stuff, man. So for me, I like to go ahead and do that first. Take my line art and kind of map out where I want to have all of my blacks, get all of that filled out, and then start using color. And honestly, when it comes to mastering all these coloring styles, man, my best advice is just to keep looking at reference images, some of your favorite artists, cartoons, animations, all of that stuff, man. See what they do, see how they do it, get inspired, and try to apply it to your own art and maybe come up with your own type of flair to it. But once you're done adding all your black lines and you're satisfied, now would be the time to go ahead and add in the flats. Now you could be done here, or you can take that extra step that in the end is very very similar to the next style that we'll be talking about. But that step is adding shading, tones, and highlights. I feel like when it comes to that comic book style, you really can add a mix of everything. You might have some soft brushes, hard shading, highlights, texture, the whole 9 yards. So I guess it depends on what you're trying to draw, what type of comic you're drawing, certain materials on your character, the setting, all of that stuff will have to be in mind, I guess. But in the end, it should look something like this. But now let's move over into the next coloring style, the cell shaded look. This is actually the first digital coloring style that I mastered, and this style you will see pretty much everywhere today when it comes to animated movies, anime, certain video games, and that's simply adding a tone, a shading layer, and maybe some highlights, but it depends on what you're trying to do. Now you can do lighter shadows, darker shadows, but the shadows can be very scarce. Similar to like those older animes or certain animes like Kill la Kill that didn't really use that many shadows, or you can go in and fill almost every part of your character character with some type of shadow, like the cell shaded Fortnite skins or Legend of Zelda, stuff like that. So once again, it really depends on what you're trying to do. And then you have the option of adding highlights. Usually I would be done after I add my tone and my shading, but the highlights always give it that extra oomph, especially if you're drawing a character with armor or maybe certain pieces of the hair to kind of attract attention to that section and give it that overall finesse. Now once you're done with all that, I would advise using some type of gradient. You don't have to, but I feel like in most animes, if you look close enough, you can see that there is a slight gradient somewhere in the background on the characters or maybe over the whole piece. So I would just have fun messing around with some gradients to see what you can come up with, because at the end of the day, art is all about having fun. Once again, use reference images. I'm gonna keep stressing this, man, because to me that's how you learn. One of my favorite animes that I like to look at when it comes to cell shaded style is My Hero Academia. I love that coloring style. I love the overall art style. I think it's mainly because I love comics so much. While this is a manga and an anime, it still uses the dark lines, you know, a mix of thick lines and thin lines, and it just blends together well. So in the end, it should look something like this. Now last but not least, there's a coloring style that I probably use the most. It's a style that I'm still trying to master, but I love it, man. And that's the 3D animation, aka Spider-Verse coloring style. Those Spider-Verse movies really inspired me when it comes to my art style. I've been hooked on trying to master that 3D look without making, you know, 3D models. Digital painting, I guess you can call it. It's definitely something that I still need to work on, but I think I'm satisfied enough with it that I can add this to this list, and I will be making a tutorial at a later date. But the way I usually go about applying this coloring style is I actually don't do my line art. Once I'm done with my sketch, I'll just start to apply flats. But I don't just use the fill tool. I usually break up the individual parts of my piece into their own separate layers so I can go into that layer individually and add all the shading and color and highlights and textures that I need to give it that 3D look. I'm always looking at reference images of Spider-Verse and other 3D animated movies that I grew up watching, like Incredibles, Moana is a good one, Tangled movies, all of those 3D animated Disney type movies. They all have their similar style, but I like to go and apply some of the Spider-Verse elements and maybe some of the elements from the latest animated Ninja Turtles movie, because that was beautiful. But I tend to use a lot of masking. If there's a certain part of the face, like the nose, I usually mask it out and work on that separately and then blend it all in with everything else. Because when it comes to this style, blending is definitely your best friend. Because in the end, you want everything to be pretty smooth unless you're going for a more stylized textured look. But during the process of this style, you're probably gonna see your image looking kind of muddy. And I always think that's a good sign, because it's starting to work into that 3D look. And that in the highlights and stuff is when it starts to really bring it together. But with this style, man, you can honestly apply everything you learn in all the other styles and just go crazy. Use hard brushes, soft brushes, different blending modes. Finding good brushes for hair definitely comes in handy, because a lot of these animated movies, the hair is so freaking good and it's kind of hard to replicate in a 2D software. So trying to find a good hair brush, certain curls and things like that definitely can help, as well as a good texture brush overall. That's one thing that you will notice with those Pixar animations and 3D animation movies, is that they always have very almost realistic texture, especially in the skin and on the clothes. I feel like that really gives it that extra life to that 3D feel. And similar to the Spider-Verse movies, I always love to add halftone dots and little lines. When I'm all done, I usually like to go over and add certain outlines or lines under the chin, lines for the nose, the mouth, maybe certain lines in the folds of the clothes, all that good stuff, man. And once again, like in the old school style, I think it would be best to go in and color in some of those lines so we can blend in together, so it doesn't just be a bold black line over all of your 3D work. But once again, it really depends on you. But at the end of the day, it should look something like this. But with that, I'm gonna be wrapping this video up, man. These are some of my favorite coloring styles that I love to use in Clip Studio Paint. That's the software I use. Like I said earlier, I will be going in and making in-depth tutorials for most, if not all, of these styles at later dates. I try to upload every Sunday on this channel. I know I missed last time, but that's because I had to redo this one because I just wasn't satisfied with the work that I did for Stargirl, man. I mean, I think it was the pose, bro. I mean, just look at it. But let me know which style is your favorite, and maybe I'll make a poll and ask what style y'all would like to see me color in next. But until next time, it's your boy NK Artist signing off.